Jake Torres had always prided himself on his ability to find humor in the worst situations, but being strapped to what appeared to be a giant jellyfish that hummed show tunes was testing even his considerable reserves of optimism. The bioluminescent restraints pulsed with an eerie blue light that seemed to sync with his heartbeat, which he found either deeply disturbing or oddly romantic, depending on whether he squinted. "Well," he said aloud to the empty chamber, his voice echoing off crystalline walls that shifted color like an oil slick, "this is definitely not what the travel brochure promised. Where's the complimentary mint on the pillow?" The walls responded to his voice with a subtle shift toward warmer hues, which Jake chose to interpret as alien hospitality rather than some kind of digestive preparation. He'd been conscious for approximately 20 minutes by his count, though time felt negotiable in a room where the ceiling displayed what looked like a live feed of several different galaxies having an argument. The door, if the shimmering membrane that occasionally solidified could be called a door, began to ripple. Jake straightened as much as the bioluminescent restraints allowed, which was roughly equivalent to sitting up in bed after a particularly enthusiastic massage from an octopus. His diplomatic training kicked in, reminding him that first impressions mattered, even when those impressions were being made while horizontal and glowing faintly blue. "Showtime," he muttered, then immediately wondered if aliens understood theatrical references, or if he just inadvertently declared war through cultural insensitivity. The figure that emerged from the membrane moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never doubted their right to occupy space. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet in Jake's estimation, with silver hair that seemed to move independently of any breeze and skin that held the faintest luminescent quality, as if moonlight had been mixed into her cellular structure during some cosmic recipe. Her features were sharp, aristocratic, and would have been entirely human except for the ears that swept upward and back in elegant points, twitching occasionally with what Jake assumed was either irritation or the alien equivalent of hay fever. "Commander Torres," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that suggested vocal cords designed for an atmosphere with entirely different acoustic properties. "I trust your accommodations have been adequate." Jake blinked. "You know, most hotels just leave a little card asking about the thread count. But sure, let's go with adequate. Though I have to ask, is the light show extra or does it come standard with the interrogation package?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across her features, though it vanished so quickly Jake wondered if he'd imagined it. Her silver eyes fixed on his face with the intensity of someone conducting a very important scientific experiment, which, he realized, she probably was. "You may call me Queen Lyrale," she said, moving closer to his bioluminescent prison with the predatory grace of a cat approaching a particularly interesting mouse. "Though I suspect you already know more about me than your diplomatic briefings would suggest." "Your Majesty," Jake said, attempting a bow that came across more like an enthusiastic nod thanks to his restraints. "I hate to disappoint, but my briefings were pretty much, try not to start any wars and remember that pointing is considered rude in 37 different star systems. Though nobody mentioned the pointing thing about ears specifically, so I'm hoping we're good on that front." The Queen's ears twitched, and Jake filed that away as potentially significant. The walls around them began to pulse more rapidly, their colors shifting toward the red end of the spectrum in what Jake hoped wasn't the alien equivalent of a smoke alarm. "Your species has a curious relationship with humor in stressful situations," she observed, circling him slowly. "Is this a defensive mechanism, or do you genuinely find your circumstances amusing?" "Little of both, honestly. I figure if I'm going to be probed by aliens, and please tell me that's not actually on the agenda, I might as well keep things light. Besides, I've had worse Mondays. There was this time in the sulfur mines, on Kepler 442b, where—" "The scar," she interrupted, and her voice carried a note Jake couldn't identify. Her gaze had fixed on the jagged line that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a memento from his mining days that he'd grown so accustomed to he sometimes forgot it was there. How did you acquire it? Jake's stomach did something complicated. The way she was staring at his scar felt less like medical curiosity and more like someone trying to solve a puzzle that shouldn't exist. Industrial accident. Boring story involving poor safety protocols and the kind of mining equipment that really should come with better warning labels. Though I guess it gives me character, right? Chicks dig scars, or so I've heard. Do aliens dig scars? Is that a thing, or am I about to commit another cultural faux pas? But the Queen wasn't laughing. If anything, her expression had grown more intense, her silver eyes narrowing as she studied the scar's pattern with the focus of someone reading an extremely important document in a language they barely understood. The chamber's walls pulsed faster, responding to what Jake was beginning to recognize as emotional states, and the bioluminescent restraints around his wrists grew noticeably warmer. "Tell me about Earth's mining operations," she said, though her gaze never left his face. "Specifically, who authorized your medical treatment following this accident?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow, though he couldn't have said why. His medical records were classified at a level that had always struck him as excessive for someone who'd basically been scraped off a mining platform and put back together by automated surgical units. But the way the Queen was looking at him, the way her pointed ears had flattened slightly against her skull, suggested that his boring industrial accident might be significantly less boring than he'd always assumed. The Queen's finger hovered inches from Jake's scar, trembling like a hummingbird that couldn't decide which flower deserved its attention. Jake tried to lean away, but the bioluminescent restraints had other ideas, keeping him pinned like a butterfly in a collection that specialized in awkward diplomatic incidents. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I'm flattered by the personal attention, but where I come from, touching someone's face usually requires at least dinner and a movie first. Maybe some light conversation about favorite colors and whether you believe in alien abduction." Ironically, she wasn't listening. Her silver eyes had taken on an intensity that made Jake's skin crawl in ways that had nothing to do with the glowing restraints. When her fingertip finally made contact with the raised tissue along his temple, the universe decided to throw a party and forgot to invite Jake's nervous system to participate willingly. The first sensation was heat, spreading from the point of contact like someone had plugged his brain directly into a fusion reactor. The chamber's walls erupted in cascading patterns of light that would have been beautiful if Jake hadn't been too busy trying not to scream. But it was the flood of images that really made him question his life choices. Suddenly, he knew things. Impossible things. Like how the atmospheric processors on Zephyr Prime converted methane storms into breathable air, and why Zephyrian courtship rituals involved synchronized bioluminescent displays that would make a Vegas light show look like a dying flashlight. He also knew, with uncomfortable clarity, that the alien Queen currently touching his face had a birthmark shaped like a nebula just below her left shoulder blade, which was exactly the kind of information he definitely shouldn't have access to without a much better explanation than diplomatic immunity. "Oh," Queen Lyreley breathed, and her voice carried harmonics Jake now understood were expressions of profound shock rather than exotic vocal cords. "Oh no, what have they done?" Jake tried to speak, but discovered his tongue was temporarily on vacation, possibly somewhere in the Andromeda galaxy. The patterns racing across his skin pulsed in perfect synchronization with the Queen's own bioluminescent displays, creating a light show that would have been romantic under different circumstances. Like circumstances where he wasn't strapped to alien furniture while experiencing what felt like the galaxy's most invasive software update. The Queen jerked her hand back as if Jake had suddenly burst into flames, which, given the way his nervous system was currently behaving, wasn't entirely out of the question. She stumbled backward, her composed royal bearing dissolving like sugar in a rainstorm. "The bailout protocol," she whispered, and Jake understood both the words and their significance with a clarity that definitely hadn't been included in his diplomatic training. But that's only granted too. How is this possible? Jake finally managed to locate his voice, though it came out slightly higher than usual. Okay, so good news and bad news. Good news. I'm apparently fluent in your language now, which should make the rest of this conversation much easier. Bad news. I'm pretty sure I just learned things about Zephyrian royal succession that are probably classified above my security clearance. Also, I may have inadvertently become your emergency backup king, which wasn't on my resume when I applied for this job. The chamber's bioluminescent walls pulsed frantically, cycling through color patterns that Jake's newly acquired knowledge translated as various degrees of "oh shit" in the Zephyrian emotional spectrum. Two guards burst through the membrane door, their own pointed ears flat against their skulls and weapons that hummed with barely contained energy pointed in Jake's general direction. "Your Majesty," one of them said in rapid Zephyrian that Jake unfortunately now understood perfectly. The bioscanners detected an unauthorized neural cascade. Should we terminate the human? Nobody's terminating anybody, Jake said quickly, his voice carrying Zephyrian inflections that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Though I appreciate the dedication to security protocols, very professional. 5 stars, would recommend to other interstellar monarchies. Queen Lyrale raised a hand, and the guards lowered their weapons with obvious reluctance. Her silver eyes fixed on Jake with an expression that managed to combine horror, fascination, and what looked suspiciously like the beginnings of a migraine. "Tell me exactly what you remember about your medical treatment," she commanded, and Jake noticed that her voice now carried undertones of royal authority that made his spine straighten involuntarily. "Leave nothing out." Jake's mind raced through memories that suddenly felt suspiciously curated. Standard trauma protocol, emergency stasis, surgical reconstruction, neural pathway rehabilitation to deal with the scarring. Took about 6 months total, which seemed excessive for what was basically reconstructive surgery. But they said I had some rare complications with the synthetic tissue integration. "Synthetic tissue," the Queen repeated flatly. "Commander Tors, that scar isn't synthetic tissue integration. Those are Zephyrian royal glyphs, specifically the emergency succession protocol that allows a bonded consort to assume temporary command in the event of the monarch's incapacitation or death." Jake blinked several times, processing this information through the lens of his newly acquired alien knowledge. "So what you're telling me is that instead of fixing my face, Earth's medical system basically tattooed me with your people's equivalent of a backup crown. That seems like a significant oversight in the medical documentation." "It's not an oversight," Queen Lyrale said grimly. "It's espionage. Someone with access to the most classified Zephyrian genetic protocols deliberately implanted you with my personal life signature. This isn't first contact, Commander Tors. This is infiltration." The guards shifted nervously, their weapons humming with increasing intensity. Jake tried to look non-threatening, which was challenging while glowing blue and apparently radiating alien royal authority. Queen Lyrale dismissed the guards with a gesture that somehow managed to convey both royal authority and barely contained panic. Jake watched them retreat through the membrane door, their pointed ears twitching with obvious reluctance to leave their queen alone with what was apparently a walking diplomatic incident wrapped in human skin. "So," Jake said once they were alone, "on a scale of 1 to galactic war, how bad is this situation exactly? Because I'm getting some mixed signals from the hole, glowing like a nightclub thing my body's doing right now." The Queen began pacing, her silver hair shifting through the chamber's prismatic light like liquid mercury. "The bailout protocol isn't just ceremonial, Commander Tors. It's a biological imperative embedded in Zephyrian royal genetics. When activated, it creates a neural link between the monarch and their designated successor that allows for the transfer of essential knowledge and decision-making authority. Right, sure, makes perfect sense, Jake said, nodding as if alien succession planning was something he dealt with every Tuesday. So the fact that I'm currently receiving what feels like the universe's most comprehensive crash course in interstellar politics means. It means that according to every bioscanner on this ship, you are my legally recognized consort with full access to state secrets, military protocols, and the collective memory of the Zephyrian royal line dating back approximately 3,000 Earth years. She stopped pacing and fixed him with a look that could have powered a small star. It also means that my council will assume I've either been compromised by enemy agents or that I've entered into a binding political alliance with Earth without consulting them. Jake tried to whistle, but his lips weren't quite cooperating with his motor functions yet. And I'm guessing Zephyrian politics doesn't have a lot of wiggle room for oops. This was a complete accident caused by overzealous human intelligence services. Zephyrian politics, the Queen said grimly, has a traditional response to perceived royal compromise that involves a lot of ceremonial daggers and very little due process. Jake tested the bioluminescent restraints, which seemed perfectly content to keep him glowing gently while he processed the implications of his situation. So we're looking at the kind of misunderstanding that ends with both of us being ceremonially stabbed, while diplomats write strongly worded letters about the unfortunate breakdown in interspecies relations. Queen Lyraleigh's ears flattened against her skull, which Jake's newly acquired knowledge helpfully identified as a sign of extreme stress rather than aerodynamic optimization. The situation is more complex than that. My military advisors have been pushing for a preemptive strike against Earth for months, convinced that humans are planning an aggressive expansion into our territory. Your presence here, with my life signature embedded in your neural pathways, will be interpreted as proof that Earth has been planning this infiltration for years. Which, to be fair, they apparently have been, Jake pointed out. I mean, you don't accidentally give someone alien royal tattoos during routine medical treatment. Someone with access to seriously classified information spent a lot of time and effort turning me into an unwitting sleeper agent. Though I have to say, if this was their master plan, they really should have included better briefing materials. Maybe a pamphlet. So you've been surgically modified for interstellar espionage. A beginner's guide. The chamber's walls pulsed with increasingly agitated colors, responding to the Queen's emotional state like a mood ring designed by someone with access to weapons-grade hallucinogens. She pressed her palms against her temples, and Jake noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. "There's something else," she said quietly. "The neural link isn't just one way. When I touched your scar, I didn't just activate the protocol in you. I opened a connection that allows you to access my memories, my knowledge, even my emotional patterns. But it also means that you're getting the full Jake Torres experience in return." Jake finished, and despite everything, he found himself grinning. "Your Majesty, I am so sorry. My brain is not exactly what you'd call organized. It's more like a filing system, designed by someone who thinks alphabetical order is a suggestion, and that putting things in random boxes counts as a valid storage strategy." Something that was definitely amusement flickered across the Queen's features. "I'm beginning to understand why your species uses humor as a coping mechanism. Your memories are chaotic, but they're also oddly reassuring. I don't think I've ever encountered a mind so completely unprepared for espionage." "Thank you," Jake said uncertainly. "I mean, I've always prided myself on my complete inability to keep secrets or think strategically. It's got me out of more dinner parties than you'd expect." The Queen's expression grew serious again. "The point is, Commander Torres, that we're linked now in ways that go far beyond diplomatic protocol. I can feel your confusion, your fear, your remarkable ability to find absurdity in life-threatening situations. And if I can feel it, then the bioscanners can detect it, which means we have perhaps 6 hours before my extended absence from court triggers security protocols that will reveal everything. Jake absorbed this information through the increasingly complex filter of alien knowledge that was apparently now permanently installed in his brain. So our options are: we can attempt to explain the situation to my counsel, which will likely result in both of us being executed for treason and Earth facing the full might of the Zephyrian fleet within a matter of weeks. Or Queen Lyralay's silver eyes met his, and Jake felt a flutter of something that might have been hope or might have been the alien equivalent of a panic attack. Or we make the neural link official. Zephyrian law allows for emergency bonding under extraordinary circumstances. If we undergo the formal consort ceremony, your presence becomes not only legal but expected. The conspiracy becomes a diplomatic breakthrough rather than an act of war. Jake blinked several times, processing this through his newly multilingual brain. So you're saying our choice is between certain death and alien marriage, to save 2 civilizations from a war that nobody actually wants. That's a remarkably succinct summary of our situation, yes. And the bonding ceremony involves psychological integration that will make our current neural link look like a casual handshake, biological synchronization that will permanently alter both of our genetic patterns, and a level of emotional intimacy that most Zephyrians spend decades preparing for. Jake considered this for approximately 30 seconds. Will I still be able to make inappropriate jokes at diplomatically sensitive moments? I suspect, Queen Lyralay said, and her voice carried what Jake was learning to recognize as Zephyrian laughter. That trait will become impossible to suppress once our minds are fully linked. In that case, Your Majesty, I think we should probably get married before someone decides to ceremonially stab us. Though I should warn you, I have absolutely no idea how to explain this to my mother. The consort bonding chamber made the interrogation room look like a budget motel. Crystalline formations jutted from every surface, each one humming with harmonics that Jake's enhanced hearing could now identify as the Zephyrian equivalent of wedding music, assuming weddings on Zephyr Prime typically sounded like a choir of singing quasars having an emotional breakdown. So, Jake said, eyeing the ceremonial platform that looked suspiciously like an altar designed by someone with strong opinions about geometric perfection, is there usually this much glowing involved in alien weddings, or are we getting the deluxe package? Queen Lyralay had traded her interrogation attire for robes that seemed to be cut from crystallized starlight, which Jake would have found more impressive if he hadn't been wearing what appeared to be the ceremonial equivalent of a disco ball. The bioluminescent patterns across his skin pulsed in rhythm with her own, creating a light show that would have been romantic if it wasn't also broadcasting their emotional states to anyone with functioning eyes. The luminescence is part of the neural synchronization process, she explained, though Jake noticed her voice carried undertones of what his newly acquired knowledge identified as ceremonial nerves. It allows the bioprocessors to monitor our compatibility during the bonding. Right, compatibility monitoring. That's not at all terrifying. Jake stepped onto the platform, which immediately began scanning him with beams of light that felt like being examined by very polite X-rays. Though I have to ask, what happens if we're incompatible? Do we explode, or is it more of a polite rejection situation? The ceremony has never failed when both participants are willing, Lyralay said, joining him on the platform. Though I should mention that the psychological integration means you'll have access to approximately 3 millennia of royal memories, including some rather tedious council meetings, and my unfortunate experimentation with Zephyrian poetry during adolescence. Your Majesty, I once spent 6 months trapped in a mining station with a guy who collected vintage Earth elevator music. I think I can handle bad poetry. The chamber responded to their proximity by increasing the intensity of its crystalline chorus, and Jake felt the neural link between them strengthen. Suddenly, he could sense Lyralay's thoughts more clearly, including her genuine amusement at his comment and her deeper worry about what they were about to undertake. The ceremony itself was surprisingly straightforward, involving synchronized breathing, the exchange of bioluminescent patterns that felt like the universe's most intimate light show, and what Jake could only describe as the psychological equivalent of opening every door in your mind simultaneously. When their consciousness merged, Jake experienced the full weight of Zephyrian collective memory, while Lyralay gained access to his chaotic but surprisingly resilient human perspective. The moment of complete integration felt like being struck by lightning made of pure understanding. Jake saw the conspiracy from both sides now, understanding how Earth's intelligence services had spent decades preparing for this moment, while also experiencing Lyralay's growing realization that the war her advisors wanted might destroy both civilizations. "Well," he said when they separated, his voice now carrying permanent Zephyrian harmonics, "that was significantly more intense than any wedding I've ever attended, though the light show was definitely worth the existential terror." Lyralay's silver eyes met his, and Jake could feel her thoughts as clearly as his own. They were truly bonded now, their minds linked in ways that made their earlier connection seem like casual conversation. But more importantly, they understood each other completely, including the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished. The chamber doors dissolved to admit the Zephyrian High Council, their pointed ears flattened with barely contained hostility, until they registered the bioluminescent displays radiating from the newly bonded pair. Jake watched their expressions shift from suspicion to confusion to grudging acceptance as the ceremonial scanners confirmed what their eyes could already see. "Honored Council," Lyralay said, her voice carrying the full authority of her position enhanced by Jake's human pragmatism, "I present my bonded consort, Commander Tors of Earth. Our union represents the deepest commitment to peace between our peoples." Counselor Vexhai, whose pointed ears twitched with what Jake now understood as diplomatic skepticism, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this human's presence aboard our flagship was not announced through proper channels. The circumstances of his arrival suggest—" "The circumstances," Jake interrupted, letting his voice carry the full resonance of his royal authority, "represent Earth's commitment to transparency in our negotiations. I volunteered for experimental biointegration procedures to demonstrate humanity's dedication to meaningful diplomatic partnership." It wasn't entirely a lie. Jake had volunteered for the mining job that led to his modification, even if he hadn't known what he was volunteering for. And the integration was definitely experimental, though probably not in ways the Council needed to understand immediately. Through their neural link, he felt Lyralay's appreciation for his diplomatic creativity, along with her growing confidence that they might actually survive the next few hours without being ceremonially stabbed. The Council exchanged glances that communicated volumes in the complex visual language of Zephyrian politics. Finally, Counselor Vexhai spoke again. "The bioscanners confirm authentic bonding integration. If Earth has produced a human capable of surviving neural synchronization with our queen, perhaps our intelligence assessments of their aggressive intentions require revision." Jake felt a wave of relief flow through both his own consciousness and Lyralay's. The conspiracy had worked, just not in the way Earth's planners had intended. Instead of giving them leverage over the Zephyrian throne, they'd created a genuine diplomatic bridge between two species who had been preparing to destroy each other over misunderstandings. "Counselor Vexhai," Jake said, "I think you'll find that human intentions are rarely as straightforward as they appear. We have a gift for stumbling into solutions while trying to solve completely different problems. It's one of our more endearing qualities." 3 hours later, Jake stood beside Lyralay in the flagship's observation deck, watching Earth grow larger through the crystalline viewport. The Zephyrian fleet had altered course from invasion formation to diplomatic escort, and Jake's neural link was buzzing, with incoming communications from both governments trying to understand how a routine first contact had resulted in an interspecies royal wedding. "Any regrets?" Lyreley asked, and through their bond Jake could feel her genuine concern beneath the question. He considered this while watching his home planet rotate slowly beneath them, his enhanced vision now capable of seeing the orbital platforms where Earth's leaders were undoubtedly having emergency meetings about their accidentally successful espionage operation. "Well," he said finally, "I started the week as a glorified diplomatic courier with a mining accident scar and a tendency to make jokes at inappropriate moments. Now I'm apparently a prince consort with access to the collective wisdom of an ancient alien civilization and the responsibility to help prevent an interstellar war. So either this is the best career advancement in human history, or I'm having the galaxy's most elaborate nervous breakdown." Through their neural link, he felt Lyreley's laughter harmonize with his own, creating bioluminescent patterns that painted the observation deck in colors that hadn't existed in either of their languages before they'd found each other. "Also," Jake added, grinning at his reflection in the crystalline viewport, "I'm pretty sure this is going to make for the most interesting wedding announcement in the history of two species. My mother is either going to be incredibly proud or have me committed for delusions of grandeur." "I suspect," Lyreley said, her voice carrying harmonics of affection that Jake could feel as warmly as physical touch, "that she'll be proud. After all, her son just prevented a war by accidentally becoming alien royalty. That's the kind of achievement that transcends normal parental expectations." Jake nodded, watching Earth's oceans catch the light of its star. Through their bond, he could feel Lyreley's memories of her own world, her people's hopes and fears, and their shared determination to build something better than the war both sides had been preparing for. He was still Jake Torres, still inclined to find humor in impossible situations and make inappropriate comments at diplomatic functions. But now he was also something more, connected to a larger purpose and a partner who understood both his chaos and his unexpected capacity for rising to meet impossible circumstances. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but then again, the best adventures never were.